All right, welcome everybody. By my clock, it is 3 minutes past the hour. It is officially time for us to go ahead and get started. So first off, proper introductions. Who is this crazy voice speaking to you through your computer speakers? Well, let me introduce myself properly, just for giggles. I'm going to go ahead and kick my camera on for a minute, and if technology works, you guys should be able to see me. Hello. I'm not going to leave it on the whole time. It's just something I like to do these days, just to make sure you guys know, who is speaking and what's going on. Before we start, though, some kind of housekeeping. Actually, I didn't finish the introduction, did I? So if you don't know me, my name is Mike Hamilton. I have been at MadCap Software since the very beginning. I'm one of the founders. My background is not in technical writing. My education is actually in physics, of all things. But I found out way back in the 1980s that if you work at a nuclear power plant and you complain the loudest about how bad the reactor plant manuals are, they put you in charge of the technical publications library. Little did I know that would send me skittering off into a whole new career direction. So I come to technical writing through kind of the side door, but I've been doing technical writing ever since the 1980s. A lot more to the background than that, but that's the short version. Also, kind of a setup for the housekeeping here. Let me move slides forward. Just so you know, this webinar is being recorded. However, not to worry, only my portion is recorded. If you type a question in the chat window or anything like that, that does not become part of the recording. So if you see that little red light, oh my gosh, it's being recorded, not to worry, your privacy is protected. Also, I do have a second monitor up. I can see that Q&A and chat interface during the webinar. So please feel free to jump in and ask questions at any time. I'll do my best to get to them all. We've got a pretty good sized group today, so it might take me a minute depending on where we are in the presentation. Also, for those who have seen a lot of our webinars already, this is a reprise of a 4-part series that I did, gosh, almost 7 years ago now. Massively popular back then, but completely updated now. In fact, this is going to have much more of developing a web portal spin on it. But so much of that is dependent on CSS. There's going to be a lot of CSS coverage in the first 2 to 3 sessions. And then the 4th session, when we bring in the responsive design and all of that, that really puts a big red bow around everything. So we've talked about introductions, we've talked about recording, we've talked about how to ask questions. I think we are ready to go. All right, now that I've done proper introductions, I am going to turn off my webcam though. You've seen my mug now. And we can jump right in to the presentation. So the agenda for today, and it's the old you have to be able to walk or crawl before you can walk, before you can run type of thing. I know that the title of this is Building Super Cool Web Portals, but the foundation of that is the Cascading Style Sheet language. Now, if you're already a super cool, CSS rock and roller, great. A lot of this will be review for you, but I wanted to start at the very beginning so that everybody has a chance to make it through all the way through the 4th session in the series. So the agenda for today, we're just going to start at the base level. Just what are cascading style sheets, sometimes just referred to as CSS? What can CSS do? A lot of people just think, oh, it can make text blue. I can change the font to Verdana. True. But that is barely the tip of the iceberg of what is possible. We're going to talk about the different types of CSS. The way you apply it can vary. And then what is cascading? I mean, it's right there in the name, Cascading Style Sheets. Why did they choose that particular word? All right, so all those first 4 bullets, that's really just kind of background theory. Then we get to the nitty-gritty. When you are building your CSS styles in Flare, what is Flare actually writing? We're going to dissect the CSS rules, their syntax, the actual code, but we're going to keep it high level. We're not going to get too crazy. It's kind of important to know that when you're flipping, switches in the Flare interface, what is Flare actually writing in the background? Then probably the biggest mistake that new users make, not understanding CSS inheritance. If you understand inheritance, you can get an amazingly good style sheet, and you will only have written just a handful of styles. But you can always tell somebody who doesn't understand inheritance, because you go to work on their project and they have 400 styles, and each style has like 200 properties set, and they're all conflicting with each other and they're fighting each other. And it's crucial to understand inheritance. Then we're going to do a bit of a quick exercise. We're going to pretend that this screen right now is just a blank piece of paper, and we are going to start writing out a cascading style sheet by hand, so we can kind of get a feel for what it is that Flare is doing for us behind the scenes. And then we're going to wrap up today a final concept. What is a custom style? And I'm actually being kind of kind here. Even the phrase custom style, that's really a word processing phrase. When you actually start talking CSS, when people talk about the equivalent of a word processing custom style, they're really talking about adding a selector with a custom class. That's the vocabulary that should be used when you're talking about cascading style sheets. Custom selectors with custom classes. And that's where we're going to finish up today. All right, so diving right in, just what are cascading style sheets? You hear this name thrown around a lot. Well, I wanted to try and use some sources that were non-controversial. So I went to Wikipedia. All right, I saw a question in the Q&A panel. Don't worry about that raise hand option or anything like that. I'm not even sure why that's in there. If you have a question, just type your question in that question panel. As I said, I can keep an eye on it out of the corner of my left eye here. The moment a question pops into that panel, I'll usually spot it. Doesn't mean that I'll answer it at that exact moment, but I did see that it came in. Sometimes I might wait till I finish a slide or a concept, and then I'll bounce out over to answer the question. But don't worry about that raise hand option. I know that's been in the meeting software forever. Honestly, I've never seen a use for it. All right, but back to the definitions. What is a cascading style sheet? Well, if we hop up to Wikipedia, the official Wikipedia definition is that a cascading style sheet, it's a style sheet language used to describe the presentation, that is the look and formatting of a document written in a markup language. They probably could have stopped there. That's a pretty good definition. Now, I want to pick this apart a little bit. So let me get my little drawing tools going here. So it's a style sheet language. I mean, it's literally a language that can be learned. Now, the cool thing, it's a language that can be learned in one weekend. If you're the kind of, quick study type, it's not something that's hard to learn at all. used to describe the presentation, that is the look, feel, and formatting. So that's the key. If we do this correctly, none of our presentation rules go into our actual topic files. That should be our goal. A topic, if you divorce the style sheet from it, should almost look like it was typed by a typewriter. Okay, yeah, I'm dating myself there. But if we do it correctly, whether it be fonts, colors, sizes, positioning, anything, if we remove the style sheet, again, that whole topic should just revert back to just Times New Roman pure text. So that's the whole purpose. And it's specifically used for documents written in the various markup languages. Lots of different markup languages. Most people are going to be thinking either HTML or XML. But those are kind of the three key points. All right, now that we've got the key points out of the way, the authors, I always want to give credit where credit is due. There are two Norwegian gentlemen, Mr. Lee and Mr. Boz, who both submitted ideas for a style language for the web way back in 1995. And they literally had nothing to do with each other. And it was kind of funny. The World Wide Web Consortium accepted these two recommendations, and they liked them both. So they actually brought these two gentlemen together and said, how about you guys like combine these two different style languages into one? And that was literally the birth of what we know today as the CSS language. So officially came to be back in 1996. Now, the scary thing, the web had been around for quite a while before that. There was no style language before that. People were just, shoving formatting into their very web pages, and it was creating a maintenance nightmare. So that is why CSS was created and where it came from. All right, so status. If that was the beginnings, where are we now? Well, currently, we are on CSS version 3. But that is even a little bit misleading. Version 3 was adopted in 2012, and even though the slide says it's the current recommendation, the World Wide Web Consortium has basically announced that there will not be, unless something changes, a CSS version 4. For the first 3 versions, you got to remember, what was the world like back in the 1990s? Everybody was following that kind of waterfall, software development model where you had these major releases, every now and then. Well, even the World Wide Web Consortium has gotten away from that. They're doing much more of kind of agile production work now. So as a result, improvements to CSS, they're added on a more common frequency, but they're added a bit here, a bit there. Now, the cool thing about that, you can actually participate in that process. The W3C keeps a page open, and I can actually bring it up and introduce you to it. This is the CSS current work and how to participate. The W3C keeps many, many, many working groups going at any one time. And here on this page, and again, all these slides, you'll be able to download them once the recording gets posted. So all these links will be included. But you can see all the different working groups, what they're working on to improve the CSS language at any given point in time. And you can actually apply to join any of these working groups. If you don't like the way tables work, well, you can join the table working group, and you can actually make recommendations on how you think tables should behave differently, inside a web browser when being styled. So it's a very open community. But that brings up a wrinkle. Support. It almost sounds like CSS is a moving target these days. And in some ways, it is. And actually, back up. That was one of the problems for early adoption. A lot of people back in the CSS1, CSS2 timeframe, they were really wary of using the CSS language. They're like, look, we started by just putting code in the page that forced this text to be bold and forced this text to be Verdana, and we're just going to keep doing that. Well, that was the problem, was a lot of the early CSS, it might work in one browser, but it might fail in a different browser. Well, thank goodness, fast forward to the year 2020, you're pretty much guaranteed that 90% of the CSS language, it just works in all modern browsers. Unless you get on that cutting edge. And that's where there are resources like this link here, this W3 Schools link. If I bring this page up, there's a great reference where you can see all of the available CSS properties that you can use. Like, for example, one that's been around forever, border. If I want a border around my headings, if I want a border around a particular paragraph because it's a note or something like that, that's a property that I can set. But what browsers support that property? Well, over here, I can see that Edge version 4, Firefox version 1, Chrome version 1, Safari version 1, and Opera version 3.5. Those are the browsers that support that border attribute. So that one's a pretty safe one to use. But then you could come up to something that's brand new, like background blend mode, which honestly, stay away from at this point. It's not supported in enough browsers, my opinion, but it's still pretty cool. For the Edge browser, your customer has to have version 79. They have to have version 30 of Firefox, version 35 of Chrome, version 7.1 of Safari, or way back to version 2 or version 22 of Opera. So if you do want to live on the cutting edge and you want to use some of the newest CSS features that have come out, what I recommend, talk to your web team or your development team, find out what browser versions they currently are writing to support. I mean, if you're documenting a web application, and if the application team says, we're compatible with, Edge version 60 and earlier, or version 60 and newer, well, then you wouldn't want to use this blend mode property because that wouldn't work on the Edge browser version 60. I hope that made sense. But the good news, as I said, 95% of CSS these days you can just use. It's only the really cutting edge stuff that you'll have to check with charts like this to make sure you're not using something that isn't supported by some of the browsers your customers might be using. All right, so what are cascading style sheets? I've thrown that phrase around several times. Well, it's literally just a text file. You can open up a cascading style sheet in Notepad if you want to. But what we write in this text file is a standards-based method for controlling the look and feel of your written topics. And I think that is important. It's standards-based. This is not something that comes from any one vendor or any one company. Anything you learn about the CSS language will obviously help you with MadCap Flare, but it will help you with any authoring tool you use for the rest of your career. So it's not a lost investment. Every moment you spend learning CSS, it's just going to reap dividends for the rest of your career. Now, here's where it's different than a word processor. CSS is comprised of rules to control elements in your topics. Now, why do I underline elements? Because that's different than in a word processor. This is the first real kind of shocker moment. People are used to being able to just, highlight text in a word processor and apply a style to it. It doesn't work that way in CSS. The way that CSS rules are applied is if you ever look at the code view of a topic, you see all these little angle brackets everywhere, these opening and closing tags. Well, style rules can only be applied to those angle bracket tags. We can't just apply it to raw text. We would literally have to wrap that raw text in a set of angle brackets first. That would be called a span element. Then we could style that span element. So we're already kind of abstracted out one level from our written content. Now, there's huge reasons they did that. It's actually beneficial, but it's just something to come to grips with. It's going to be different than everything you thought you knew in word processors. But the whole goal is to separate formatting from content. So again, I could have 1,000 pages and I apply the style sheet and all 1,000 pages are beautiful. And then marketing changes their mind. We're not going to use Verdana text anymore. We're going to use Tahoma. Well, instead of having to edit 1,000 pages, I just go to my one style sheet. I make a quick 5-minute edit in that, and now all 1,000 pages are now rendering using Tahoma instead of Verdana. So that's what we mean by a complete separation of formatting from the content itself. All right, now this is my favorite part of this entire presentation. This is the real kind of aha moment for a lot of people. What can the CSS language do? Well, the obvious ones. Can we do text formatting? Of course. But we can also do element sizing. If I have a screenshot and I have very strict rules on how that screenshot must be sized, I don't have to spend half my day in a graphic arts package pretending to be a graphic artist. I could literally take that raw screenshot from an engineer, apply one style to it, and boom, it's the exact size that I need. And that means if I get 15 different screenshots and they're all different resolutions, they're all from different from different engineers, I can drop all 15 of those in 15 different topics. And as long as I apply that same style, bit, all 15 are now exactly the same, at least for the customer. So doing element sizing through styles, it gets you a really professional look really fast. Element positioning. Maybe I want that screenshot not on the left side of the page, but on the right side of the page. And maybe I want the text to flow around that screenshot, kind of newsprint style. Easy to do using CSS properties. You can even change link attributes. I've seen a lot of customers do this. If it's going to behave like a normal link, meaning you click it, you go to a new page, then they want the link to be blue. However, if this is a link that when you click it, you get a pop-up window, well, then maybe we want that link to be green. And that way there's a visual affordance for the reader that says, hey, a different color in the link means different behavior is going to happen. That's easy to do through a style sheet. And believe it or not, you can even manipulate the mouse cursor. Now, I'm not sure why you would want to, but you could set it up so that if somebody mouses over a specific row in your table, they now get the spinning hourglass cursor like the computer's thinking. Again, maybe that's an April Fool's joke. I don't know, but that could be done through CSS. So it goes way deeper than just modifying text. And my favorite example of that is a website called www.csσzengarden.com. Now, if you've never been to the Zen Garden, I highly recommend you spend a few minutes just checking it out, because it's one of the best examples I've ever seen to prove to people the flexibility and power that can come from using style sheets correctly. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click that link. I'm going to pull up a sample. Oops, and I gave away the show. All right, so when you first launch the Zen Garden, this is what you will see. And it's a pretty nice looking site. Now, where did this come from? Well, it started, if I scroll down to the bottom, by a gentleman named Dave Shea. And if I remember the story correctly, Mr. Shea was in university and he was learning about web development, and he was struggling a little bit with this CSS idea. So Mr. Shea created this website called the Zen Garden just to practice his CSS skills. Well, the thing about the web is it's public. Other people stumbled onto CSS Zen Garden, and they started providing alternate style sheets. And it just kind of grew. So what you're seeing here is what Mr. Shea came up with. And it's a pretty nice design. You know, there's some pretty artwork up at the top. Way up at the very top, it says CSS Zen Garden. That is our heading 1 text. Below that, the beauty of CSS design, that's our heading 2. Then there is some sample text, some pull quotes. Then there's a heading 3, some body content, heading 3, body. So pretty, you know, pretty cool. But also notice there's a right-hand column with all of these links and a different background color. And then if we scroll down, there's some different background shading. Boy, he must have put a lot of code into this topic. Actually, no, he didn't. Everything you're seeing is from a style sheet. And to prove that, Mr. Shea has linked the raw HTML file and the raw CSS file. So if you want to pull these apart, you can. Now, if you click on just the HTML file with the style sheet removed, this is what that page looks like. And if you say, boy, that looks just like what I create in Flare, exactly. The only difference between what you are doing and what you just saw is a style sheet. That's it. So I know the title of this whole series is how to get great looking web portals, but the style sheet is the key to getting there. So again, here's our heading 1, here's our heading 2, heading 3, paragraphs, heading 3, paragraph, pretty straightforward. And you say, but wait a minute, what about those links that were on the right? Well, if I scroll down, here they are. They're just down at the bottom of the page. Well, again, styles have to be applied to elements. So one of the things, you'd actually have to go to the code view to see this, but all of these links down here are in a box, which is basically a div element, and that div element is being controlled from the style sheet. So in that previous example, they basically in the style sheet said, hey, anything in that div that is named navigation, move that to the right side of the page, give it a green background color, and then space those links out vertically. So that was literally done by a style sheet. All right, so let's get rid of my little scribbles here. So if that's the level of control we have, again, if we apply the style sheet back to this page, boom. Okay, now we go back to the original look and feel. But this is how powerful style sheets are. Let's say you've developed this look and feel. It's gorgeous. Customers love it. But then 2 years in the future, marketing goes through a complete corporate rebrand. And they want a completely new look and feel for the entire site. Well, if your topics are set up correctly, you don't have to edit a single topic. All you do is create a new style sheet. And that's what these list of links are over here on the right. If I click the link mid-century modern, all that's going to happen is a new style sheet gets applied. This is the exact same page. Where did the heading 1 go? It's up in the top left corner, and it's rotated and it's going vertical. Then we have our heading 2 here, our little pull quote over here. And then if we scroll down, well, here's our heading 3s and body text. And then this heading 3 is going vertical and body. But again, it's the exact same page. The only difference is a different style sheet was applied. All right, just for giggles, let's try another one. Let's try Verde Moderna, number 8 here. Oh, I guess that's the original one. Okay, let's try Steel. Ooh, that's a little industrial for my tastes, but you get the idea how much control you have using just a style sheet. All right, we're going to finish with a robot named Jimmy, because that one's silly, but it also shows that you can even do things like animation using just the CSS language. So I don't know if you missed it or not, but my buddy Jimmy here, he actually slid in from the bottom of the page. This little starburst behind Jimmy is rotating. It just doesn't come through the web video very well. I think the web video is at like 5 frames per second, whereas this is actually rotating fairly quickly when it's live on your screen. But what I like about the robot named Jimmy is not only does it show the animation capabilities, but it shows that CSS even supports transparency. So if you look down here at the road to enlightenment, and so what is this about? Well, not only have they set it up to do multi-column, which is just from the style sheet, but you can just barely see Jimmy through that white background. It's not completely opaque. So transparency levels can be set in your style sheet. Now, when we get to the blue background, it is opaque. But if I keep scrolling, well, when I get to a white area, well, now I can barely see Jimmy again. All right, but I think we've beat this horse enough, as they say. This should give you an idea that style sheets go way beyond just making text blue and making it Verdana and, changing its size. We have so much control over the rendering of our topics, our pages, if we just learn a little bit about the CSS language. All right, so the most important takeaway, everything we just saw, not only can CSS do that to control a single topic or a single page, but if that same CSS file is linked to thousands or even tens of thousands of your topics, by simply adjusting that one CSS page, we can be updating the look and feel of literally tens of thousands of topics all at the same time. That makes your life a whole lot easier when it's time to make updates. You know, when marketing decides that features in software, they should be italic instead of bold. Well, how much easier is life if you go adjust one style from bold to italic versus having to go hand edit tens of thousands of topics? All right, so enough of that background. What are the different types of CSS, the different implementations of CSS? Well, before we talk about that, we have to talk about how topics are structured at a code level. And if you don't like to see code, my apologies. This is about as deep as we go. So I'll try to walk you through this. Now, the way this is set up, and to grossly oversimplify, anytime you see a set of opening angle brackets, here it's a P, matched with a closing set of angle brackets, here it's /P, that represents a single element. But elements can be nested within other elements. So you might notice that there's a P element here, there's an H1, a heading 1 element here, but both of these are inside of an element called body. It's almost like little Russian nesting dolls. You can have elements inside of other elements, and this is part of that inheritance. This H1 element is a child of the body element. And then body is actually a child of HTML. That's the document itself. So this can get really confusing. So sometimes it's easier if you just kind of visualize this nesting graphically. So if we were to redraw all of these elements graphically, and just to make it easier, I'll color code everything for everybody. At the root level, there's an HTML element that represents the entire page. And that's the red box containing everything. Inside of HTML, there are two secondary elements, head and body. Head being in purple, body being in light blue. Well, what's up with that? Every topic has these. What it is, anything in body, that is what shows up in the Flare editor. That is what the customer will see in their web browser. Body, that is your content area. Well, what's up with head? Well, that's information about that topic. Here, for example, there's a title field. If you ever struggled with those hidden topic titles, well, that's where they get stored, in that head area. This is where, custom JavaScript for the page could be stored. This is where we could link to our proper style sheet if we're using it. So why am I wasting time here? Why am I showing you all of this? Well, as I mentioned, there are three different ways, three different implementations of CSS. If I try to apply CSS on a single word, let's say, well, that would be local or inline CSS. If I want to apply CSS that only applies to this one topic, but the entire topic, well, then I would do it in this area, and that would be embedded CSS. And then if I want to link this entire topic to an external CSS, well, again, that would be external, and that would just be linked. So you can have inline CSS, embedded CSS, or external CSS. External is what we want. These other two, while yes, they're legal, yes, they can be done, they're just going to cause maintenance nightmares, update nightmares in the future. So I show them all just because you may run into these. You know, if somebody gives you 20 HTML pages to import into your Flare project, you might be importing some inline formatting. You might be importing some embedded styles. So it's important to recognize these three different implementations because you may have to deal with them at some point. All right, so now that we have that background, now going into the types, those three different implementations, and again, I mentioned them, doing it more textually. So inline, if I highlight a phrase and I want that phrase to be bold, that would be inline formatting if we're simply literally embedding the code that says make this bold. Then there's embedded, and that's where I actually put code in that head area. And I could say, I want all heading 2s on this page to be purple. So that way I don't have to go and style every heading 2, but it only applies to that one topic, not any others. And then finally, external, this is what we actually want. This is what gives you the most control. Here's where I can say, I want heading 2s to be purple. And that could affect, 10,000 topics now. We just updated all heading 2s throughout the entire project to be purple. All right, so those are the three implementations. Now, inline CSS, how do we know if we run into this? It's pretty straightforward. If this is a normal paragraph, if I were to look at the code view, well, old school, this is what old inline formatting would look like. There are literally additional element tags embedded inside the paragraph, in this case, opening B and closing B, that makes this text bold. Now, even that is not supposed to be used anymore, although a lot of people do. It's still supported by the web browsers. It's one of those things where the W3C tried to kill that technique about 15 years ago. It had just been used so often that it was pretty much impossible to kill it off. So you will run into that on occasion, but the more modern implementation is to use the proper CSS syntax. In this case, style equals font weight bold, but it's still considered inline because we're actually I don't want to use that word, we're actually inserting the formatting itself inside the paragraph. So this is kind of the evil mean way. We don't want to do this. This causes maintenance problems in the future, but that is the modern version of inline CSS. So get rid of my scribbles. Then we get to embedded CSS. And again, this is something, it's really difficult to try and get Flare to even do this. It's meant to be difficult. This is kind of a really out of fashion technique. But if you were to open your document in a code editor and actually look at that head area, well, there are actually style elements. And in this case, it says P, which means all paragraphs, font weight bold, and then it closes the style. So if this was put into the head area, the code area, well, that means every paragraph in this topic, but only this one topic, would be bold. So it's not on a single paragraph the way inline formatting would be, but it only affects this one topic. But then we get to what we really want, external CSS. This is still applied in that head area, but notice over here on the right, there's no actual make it look this way. There's no color, there's no bold, it's just a link. And it tells this topic, hey, all of the rules for formatting this page can be found in a style sheet. And the style sheet in this case is named example.css. This is the only look and feel reference that we want anywhere in the topic. Everywhere else in the topic, we just want named elements. We want this heading 1 to reference style 24. We want this div to reference style 19. And they're not really numbered. I'm just using numbers as an example. I want them to reference their named style counterpart in the style sheet. So that's the proper setup. Now, of course, you don't have to manually go in and type a line like this into every topic. Once you create your topic template in Flare, your template will have that reference in it. And now anybody in Flare who creates a new topic, it should automatically have that link already built in. All right, so finally, we're almost done with the theory part, and I need to speed up. We're almost out of our hour. So what is the cascade? Well, since there's 3 different ways to write these rules, and I know I've seen a couple of people drop out already, and they're really going to miss out because now it's all going to come together. Why did I waste your time teaching you about things that I told you you shouldn't use? Because of the cascade. Those 3 different types of CSS all combine at runtime to render the page. So if I have a rule in my external style sheet that says heading 1s are blue, and then there's an embedded rule in the topic that says heading 1s are green, and then in the topic, on the heading 1 itself, there's an inline rule that says it's red. I have 3 different style rules that are all contradicting each other at the very moment of rendering. Who wins? That is the cascade. And the way it works, inline styles always win. And inline styles will always override embedded styles in that head area, any style rules, and embedded styles will always overrule any linked or external style sheets. So this explains why I just wasted 15 minutes going over all of that theory, because you're going to go and create a beautiful style sheet. You're going to go and apply it to your topics. And in a lot of cases, you're going to get weird results. It's not what you expected. Well, that's because if your topics have a bunch of inline formatting or embedded formatting, that's going to be overriding your beautiful new style sheet. You literally have to get that old cranky inline and embedded formatting out of your topics before your beautiful new linked style sheet can show through. So that's why I kind of beat on those different areas. So it was so important, because a lot of people go to apply their style sheet and part of the page looks good, but the headings are still wrong. And they call tech support and they start screaming, this CSS thing is broken. There's nothing wrong with the CSS. When you go and look, somebody manually highlighted that heading 1 and they manually applied the color green. And so now when your style sheet says make it blue, well, that inline green formatting, that wins. We literally have to get the inline formatting out. Now, the good news is several tools in Flare to make that easier. We're going to cover those tools in session 4. The first 3 sessions are going to mostly be all theory. Session 4 is when we actually open up Flare and we make the sausage, as they say. All right, so that is the cascade. It's crucial to understand, otherwise you'll never be able to do troubleshooting. All right, now the rules themselves. And again, we're getting a little technical here, so I'm going to do this quickly. But when you go into the Flare CSS editor and you tell Flare, I want a style named this, and I want it to make text blue, and I want it to make text bold, what is Flare actually writing? Well, if you do inline, it's just going to do that style equals little rule, but we don't want to do inlines or embeddeds. But when you do an external, if you tell Flare, hey, I want my heading ones to be bold, then this is exactly what Flare is going to be writing into that style sheet. And there's some critical parts to it. The first part is the selector. And again, if you remember back, I said there's no such thing as a, using air quotes here, custom style in CSS. We have selectors with custom classes. Well, that's where the selector comes in. Am I trying to control paragraphs? Am I trying to control headings? Am I trying to control list items? We have to know the selector. How we're going to change the selector, that is known as the declaration. And then even the declaration gets broken down into properties and values. Again, at a beginner level, just push the I believe button. However, as you start getting more to the intermediate and advanced level, you're going to have to know what Flare is actually doing under the hood when you really start creating some advanced single sourcing and responsive design type styles. The other thing is that these declarations, these different property value pairs, they can be strung together. So here on the bottom, it says heading 1, but font weight bold, semicolon, color black. So here we've set the font weight and the text color, but we can do it in a single declaration. Now that is a little weird looking. Normally they stack up vertically. I'll show you an example of that in a minute. All right, inheritance, I kind of cheated. I covered that a little bit earlier. But again, every child will inherit from its parent element. The more we understand about that, the easier it is to write our style sheet with as few styles as possible. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to bring up a sample here. Here's my body area, and inside the body area, there's a single heading 1 and a single paragraph. And I'll give away some history here. I don't think we still ask this anymore, but in the old days, if somebody applied to be a technical writer at MadCap Software, this was actually an interview question. Given that sample topic, if we want all text on this page to be in the font Arial, what styles would you write into the style sheet? And it was a trick question. If you understand inheritance, well, you know H1 and P are both children of body, so you should write one style, body, font family, Arial. By setting body to Arial, well, heading 1 and paragraph both inherit that font. What a lot of people with a word processor background are just ingrained to do is to write 2 styles. H1, font family Arial, P, font family Arial. Big red flag. You're writing too many styles. You're going to create a great big furball that you can't untangle later on. So the more you understand about inheritance, what you can kind of take away from this, if 90% of your text, your list items, the text in your table cells, your paragraphs, if all of that text is going to be Verdana, black, and a given size, we'll set all of those attributes on body and then just let them inherit to the paragraphs, to the list items, to the table cells. And that way you're not running around trying to chase these same settings on multiple selectors. So that's the key with inheritance. Now, creating a cascading style sheet. So given this sample topic over here on the right, HTML document, there's a head area and a body area. All that's in the head area right now is a link to a style sheet, which has not been written yet. We're going to write that over here on the left. And we're going to be controlling a heading 1, a paragraph, a heading 2, and 2 additional paragraphs. So we're going to start writing. Everything inherits from body, so we're going to start with body. So color, that's the hexadecimal value for black. So we're going to set all text to be black. Background, we're going to set the background of this page not to white, but to a light silver. That way it'll just look different than the rest of the slide I have up right now. Font size. Now this is actually a beginner mistake. You do not want to use point sizes when sizing text that's going to a web browser. And if my saying that just freaked you out, you definitely need to catch the second part in this series. I'll go into great detail about font sizing and the correct way to do it in a web browser. Font family, we're going to set the font to be Verdana. By setting that on body, every element on the page is now going to inherit these values. But then we're going to go to H1. Color, that is actually blue. By setting a color on the H1, we're breaking the inheritance of that black. And font size, we're going to set heading 1 to be a larger size. So we're breaking that inheritance of 8 point. But notice we did not set background or font family. Since those were not set, those 2 properties will still inherit. And then if we do for H2, we do a different color of blue and a different font size. And then just for giggles, they changed the margin bottom on the paragraph. But that's a pretty straightforward style sheet. We apply that style sheet to this topic, and this is what renders. My heading 1 is royal blue. It has a size of 12 point. My paragraphs, those are all 8 point black and Verdana. And my heading 2 is navy blue and 10 point. But notice that my headings, both of them, still have that silver background color. That was inherited from body. And they're both still Verdana. That was inherited from body as well. So that's a pretty straightforward style sheet. We're almost done. We're going to do a custom style now. Even though custom styles don't really exist, again, for beginners, I just wanted to use that vocabulary. But we're going to do a class of the paragraph selector. That is what officially a custom style would be known as in CSS. So the way that classes work, if I just say the selector P should have color blue and a new margin, well, that would apply to all paragraphs. What if I have a special paragraph? Well, there's this thing called the dot syntax, where you can add a name to a selector. The name I'm adding is my class, and it's now P dot my class. This is what would be written in the style sheet. This is what Flare is going to write if you go into the Flare editor and you click that button that says Add Selector. Then in the style sheet, I can set color blue, margin left, whatever value. But now I have a very specific paragraph style that can be applied. Then what it looks like, if this upper part is what's in the style sheet, this lower part, if you put your cursor in a paragraph and you tell Flare, hey, apply p.myClass, well, this is the code that Flare is going to write into your topic. That paragraph opening tag will be updated to say class equals my class. And it has to be a dual match. So as long as the selector matches, and as long as the class name matches, as long as both of those match, then this property will be applied to that content. If this was H1 class equals my class, would not be applied. If this was P class equals your class, it would not be applied. Both the selector and the class name have to match. So now back to our sample here, I've made one modification. This bottom paragraph now says class equals tip. So we want to render this bottom paragraph in a special way. Well, we're going to start with that same style sheet we started with last time, all the same settings, but I'm now going to add p.tip down at the bottom. We're going to set a special color and a font weight bold and a special background color, and then a whole bunch of padding and a whole bunch of border attributes. And if you go, yikes, believe it or not, that's what a normal style looks like if you were to open it in Notepad. We have one selector, one class name, but then our declaration is huge with lots of properties, lots of values. With this style sheet and this sample topic, if we render it now, well, the upper part looks just like last time, but now we have that p.tip style applied to that bottom paragraph. And so the text color is mint green, it's bold, the background color is dark gray, and then we've got the padding and the border attributes giving us an overline and an underline. So that is the key to doing, again, what people will think of as custom styles. They're really custom classes assigned to selectors. All right, so summary. I apologize, we went 5 minutes long. So what are cascading style sheets? We talked about that. It's a style language used to control the look and feel of content written in markup languages. What can CSS do? Well, we looked at that Zen garden. It can do pretty much anything you want as far as rendering the page. Not only change fonts and sizes and colors, but we can literally move content around the page, resize content, you name it. We talked about the different types of CSS, inline versus embedded versus external. We talked about the cascade, that inline will override embedded and embedded will override external. We looked at the different CSS rules, selectors versus declarations. We talked about inheritance. How do those individual properties in a declaration inherit between those child objects? We looked at building a very rough cascading style sheet and then adding a custom style to it. Question in the chat window. Why do the headings look bold? Oh, let me go back a couple of pages there. The headings, they just look bold because they're larger. There really is no bold attribute applied here. And then question from Chris, what are the advantages of creating p.tip versus a generic class that is just .tip? That's getting a little more advanced, but a super brief, not very deep answer. The problem with generic classes, a lot of times people think they will stack, and they don't. They tend to replace. So what if I already had p class equals tip, and I'm getting this green, on gray look down here, but then in my style should have a generic class that is, I wouldn't create this, but I've seen it done dot italic. And you think, oh, well, I'll apply that. Well, dot italic does not add to p dot tip. It literally replaces it. So that's the thing where I would be careful with generic classes, classes that don't have a selector in front of them. If you understand that they are a replacement, not an addition, then that is a powerful technique, and we do teach that in our advanced class. As a beginner with CSS, though, I'd be a little cautious with generic classes just because, again, a lot of people tend to think that their behavior is additive when it's not. It will literally replace an existing style if you go to apply it. Hope that made sense. All right, so we went through the summary. Addenda. There are some really good books out there that I highly recommend. Again, if you download this slide deck, you will have all of these. So you don't have to screenshot this real quick unless you want to. My favorite of all of these, although it is getting a bit out of date, I will admit, but this is the book that I used to learn the CSS language. I did it back when it was the first edition. But the reason I like this book, it was written by the two gentlemen who actually invented the language. So they're able to give you insights of why certain things, the work they do, work the way that they do. And to me, it was my light bulb moment. And the nice thing is it's inexpensive. A lot of these books can be really expensive, especially like the O'Reilly guides and things. I think Designing for the Web 3rd edition, I'm going by memory, but I want to say it was under 30 bucks, which as far as technical books go, that's pretty reasonable. Another one that I know a lot of people like is CSS to the Point. If you have attended any of the Flare training classes, you may recognize the name Scott Deloche. Scott has a technical writing consulting firm, and MadCap actually contracts with Scott to write our training manuals for our training classes. So he's an expert in the industry, and he has published CSS to the Point. And what's nice is most generic CSS books approach CSS from the point of view of a webmaster. Scott's book literally approaches it from the viewpoint of a technical writer. So that is a huge advantage. Then the other two that I recommend, I would go with those two first. If you want to go deeper, then this top option and this bottom option. I will be honest, I have all four of these on my bookshelf. The one by Lee and Boz is beat to death. The spine is broken. There are pages taped back in. It's usually my go-to. If I don't find what I'm looking for there, I go to Scott's book. And then last, I'll go into the O'Reilly book or the HTML5 and CSS3 Murocs. All right, so let's get rid of that. And then a couple of quick announcements. Don't forget, if you want to just immerse yourself in all things MadCap, then we are announcing we will be holding Mad World again. Obviously, we took 2020 off because of the world situation. Our crystal ball is saying that by October of next year, we should be able to do conferences again. So we will be moving it, though, from San Diego to Austin, Texas. We do have an office in Austin, Texas, so it's easy for us to manage. But we've had feedback that San Diego is just kind of hard to reach for a lot of the East Coast folks. So we thought we would move it more centrally. So that is coming up. Also, when you download the slide deck, there will be a link. If you are on an ancient version of Flare, I mean, maybe you're on Flare version, 2016 still or something, and there's cool stuff you're seeing in the new release, then just by attending this webinar, they're offering an upgrade discount for you. There's a special link you can click on. So that will be included. But with that, thank you so much, everybody. We went a few minutes long there. My apologies, but this was a big subject to cover. Again, I encourage you to stick around for the coming sessions in this series. They're going to start getting deeper. Oh, I thought I had a slide showing the upcoming ones. Let me check something real quick. Ooh, that slide got hidden. I didn't mean for that to happen. So let's see if I can make that happen. Now, this is not official. These labels will be cleaned up when we upload them. But part 2 of this series, we're going to go in depth. How do we use those techniques we just learned and control text? So not only fonts and sizing, colors, kerning, super deep into controlling text. The 3rd hour in this webinar series will be controlling graphics and images. And then part 4, again, that's where we're going to make the sausage. We're going to open up all of the 3 previous sessions. We're going to open up the Flare editor, and we're going to do some deep dive into some style construction with a heavy focus on responsive design. How do we style content that will self-adapt between desktop browsers, tablet browsers, and smartphones? All right, I see a few questions popping in. Let me get to those. Where can you download the slide deck from? Not to worry. It will take us the rest of the afternoon likely to process the video that's still recording as I speak. Once that video has been processed, we will put it up on our website in the webinar area. We will also add a link to download the slides that I used, and everybody who attended today will receive an email notification once those items are published, and you'll have a link to go visit those. So just by being here, you will, well, if you provided a real email address when you logged in, it's amazing to me how many people have the email address sadams@beer.com. But if you provided a real email address, then you will receive an email once the recording and the slide deck have both been posted up to our website. And then you can download the slide deck, click all the links, all the good stuff. Question, will controlling text session 2 include adding separator lines between headings on a nav panel? It could. In fact, that's the kind of thing that I'm not sure I'll write that in. I'm the one who will be doing that session as well. But if you ask me that question live, that's something I could demonstrate fairly quickly. So just put a pin in that. That could definitely be covered in that session 2. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps up everything we needed to cover today. I've gotten to all the questions in the Q&A window. I just want to say thank you so much, everybody. Stand by for that email with those links to be received. But with that, cheers. Have a great afternoon and an even better rest of your week.